Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Chris at Tutor House Immigration, and today I'm going to be talking about spousal sponsorship applications, common law sponsorship applications in Canada, and sort of the general overview, and then some reasons they might be refused, and then also some tips on how to process your spousal application properly. We're just starting this YouTube channel. This is the very first video. So, if you're interested in learning more about this content, I want you to hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers in 3 months. So that's our goal. Anyway, let's dive right into this topic. Spousal applications are by far one of the easiest applications in processing for PRs in Canada, because the reasons are, you don't have to, prove anything else aside from the relationship, right? So in a lot of cases, you get people, convoluting things together, like, oh, do I have to have enough money for the sponsor? My wife doesn't speak English. They don't have a job, they never graduated high school. It doesn't matter. All of that stuff is inconsequential, because our laws basically say at the highest level, they say, a Canadian citizen or permanent resident can immediately invite and make permanent residents their family members. And a family member is considered a spouse, a child, or a parent. Now the parent is a whole nother kind of issue I won't get into today. But, if you have a child or a spouse or a common law partner, they can become a permanent resident just based on their own merits, right? Just because they are a family member to you and you happen to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. So there's two broadly, speaking, two pathways to become sponsored. The one would be called the inland application, one's the outland application. Inland, by virtue of the name, it takes place inside Canada. So in that process, you have to, first of all, be admitted to Canada as a visitor, and then you have to submit an application for sponsorship. So, that scenario, you might already be in Canada, maybe as a temporary resident or a worker, and you've, met someone, gotten married. So you don't plan on leaving Canada. So you're declaring Canada your country of residence. You can apply directly from within Canada, and that process would take, most times it takes around eight months, but I've just looked online to the IRCC processing times, and this is like, as the making of this video, they're processing these at like 28 months, which is absolutely insane, by the way. I don't even know if that is like fake news or what, but I'm definitely going to get to the bottom of that, because normally you're looking at inland applications taking way shorter period of time than outland. But anyway, back to the topic. So inland applications all take place in Canada. That means that the application never leaves Canada, which is helpful in a lot of ways, if you think about it, because there's fewer people looking at the application. There's fewer, processing centers to get involved. And also the benefit of doing that too is that if you're out of status, for example, and you can't leave Canada, you can't re-enter Canada because you don't have a permit, don't have a visa, then you're allowed to stay in Canada until there's a decision made on that application. For your spousal or common law partner. So that's actually a benefit to most people, is that they get to, stay in Canada without fear of being, losing their status, as long as they've made that application in Canada on the in Canada side. And the way you do that is you actually declare it up front on the application. It'll say, are you residing in Canada and applying under the in Canada class, or are you planning on leaving Canada and applying on the outland class? So also on the inland class, you have other benefits. There is like a work permit that's available, and you'll read about this online. You'll say like spousal open work permit for people that are applying for permanent residence in Canada. Now, in reality, what happens is, you submit your application in Canada, and then technically in the past, you were allowed to submit a work permit application at the same time. And that was great. You get the work permit in about 2 or 3 months, but that's not the case anymore. Due to the backlogs we're having, especially in the temporary residence applications for work permits, they want you to have in first what's called an AOR, Acknowledgement of Receipt, for the spousal sponsorship application that took place in Canada. So that document alone can take months to get. You could be submitted your spousal application in September, and you're not going to get the AOR till January. And then once you get the AOR, that's the ticket you kind of need to apply for that work permit. Then you can submit the application for the work permit, and then you're in another queue altogether. That could be 3-4 months long to get that work permit. Now, as of the making of this video, the processing time for spousal in Canada has increased to 28 months. So maybe the work permit becomes more relevant, because, even if you're waiting 8-9 months to get the work permit, you're still going to have another, 14, 16 months until the PR is being processed. And that kind of resonates a little bit. Like that makes a lot of sense now. If they're going to say, okay, we're going to allocate our resources from inland to outland, or wherever, they're going to offer work permits to these people that are in Canada. So, I mean, that's kind of a to be determined situation, depending on how those processing times actually, manifest. If we're going to see that start right away, or if it's going to be implemented throughout, a particular timeline. So anyway, so the inland class, it's beneficial if you're already in Canada. If you're not in Canada already, or if you're thinking about kind of like coming to Canada, but also leaving and then leaving again, the Outland class is a better option because Outland has, no obligation to be in Canada physically, as opposed to the inland, you're declaring residence in Canada. The Outland, you could be residing in Canada, or you don't have to be. You could be, I'm going to be back in my home country working until I become a permanent resident, right? And that's often what I'd recommend to people if their overseas partner is working, in their home country. It almost makes more sense for them to apply from the Outland class and wait for the application to be fully processed. And then once you become a PR, you sort of fly in, get your document, and now you can begin working in the Canadian workforce right away, as opposed to, waiting months and months and months to get a work permit to allow yourself to do that. Now, obviously, the downside is that you might be separated from your spouse for some time if the spouse is already in Canada and you're not in Canada. The Outland class is popular for that reason, sometimes too, because, sponsors might be in Canada for, whatever reason, work, study, and then also their applicant is overseas in their home country, so, and they maybe need a visa to get back into Canada. So, you can't just get a visa. You can't just say, I'm going to apply for a visa so that my spouse can come to Canada and we're going to apply in the inland class. Like visas are very difficult to get these days, for any variety of reasons, right? But so it's often, the solution is like just sponsor them from their home country. And if you look at IRCC's processing times for sponsorship Outland right now, they're around 12 months. And I actually anticipate that number to go down to even quicker times because, spousals are the easiest ways to get permanent residence into Canada. Like there are very few moving parts to these applications. If you have an authentic relationship, submit your application and, 12 months later, they're a permanent resident. But the processing does take place outside of Canada, so if you're applying from, say, Italy, your processing is going to take place in the visa application center in Rome. Now, that particular center might be overloaded with applications for another program altogether, right? And so you might find yourself in another backlog over there. It's hard to say. So it kind of depends on where you're applying from on the Outland class, how quickly it's going to get processed. But, judging by the news I've read recently on the inland applications, I think any Outland application would be better than an inland. So even if you're in Canada at the same time, it's probably easier to apply from Outland in terms of time and speed. So Outland applications also have the benefit of an appeal. Appeals are kind of overrated. Like, if you get refused for any reason, you can appeal this application at at a judicial level. But, to be honest, like an easier solution would just be to gather your documents again and reapply, because an appeal might take years and years to process. Now, if you can't reapply for some reason, because the decision that was made on the refusal was just so, so wrong that there's no way to overcome it, then yeah, an appeal makes sense, right? But that's like we're talking about like very specific situations. When applications are refused, they're refused on usually the grounds of the marriage is not proven to be authentic, or the relationship isn't proven to be authentic. And we have a word for that in the immigration space. It's called marriage of convenience. So what that means is when two people get married or enter in a common law relationship for the purpose of achieving their immigration goals. So if you come into like a business-like relationship with someone and say, listen, I'll sponsor you to become a permanent resident, but we're not really going to be in a conjugal relationship, that whole thing is illegal. You can't do that. And so if you get busted doing that, you're going to be rejected. Your application will be refused, and then you might even be barred from applying in the future for some time. So it's not worth messing around with in terms of like trying to, fake a relationship. That is really important. I can't stress that enough. Like when the clients with cases that we take on at Tutor House, like we basically we interview our client, for 10, 15, 20 minutes before we even decide to take them in, because we want to know the whole history of the relationship. How'd you guys meet and how long you've been living together? If you have, how long do you communicate, or how much do you communicate together? Who knows about the relationship? All these things really, really, really matter when it comes time to apply for your application, So at the end of the day, if the relationship is authentic, meaning like, two people fell in love and there's a love story here, and they're together, they're committed, then I'm on board 100%. Like, we can overcome everything else. We can overcome previous relationships. We can overcome dependence. We can overcome criminal history, medical issues. But if the relationship is not valid, if there's something iffy about it, like, maybe it appears that they're not together, maybe they were separated, they got back together for some reason, I just say no way, because you're asking for a whole lot of trouble at the assessment stage, 12, 16 months later when it actually gets assessed. So on that note, one of the good tests for, will my application be successful is just asking yourself, am I in an authentic relationship with the person I'm trying to sponsor? And if the answer is yes, then you don't really have anything to worry about. You can prove it in a variety of ways, maybe you don't have the joint bank account set up, right? Well, do you e-transfer each other, right? Because that's what people do in marriage-like relationships. They e-transfer, they share finances. So you want to make sure that if you're going to be applying under spousal or common law, that you really want to make sure you're set up for a successful application from the beginning. So we're looking at defining the relationship has to exist on 3 levels. You have to have, first of all, if you're married, if you're common law, you have to have cohabited for 12 months. So there's a requirement for common law to cohabit for 12 months. But, what's the difference between that and roommates who cohabit for 12 months, right? Well, the difference is there's a conjugal element. So you have another layer on top of that, which is an emotional relationship between the person. So you have to prove that, right? And then you have to have a financial relationship with the person. So there's 3 levels. There's a cohabitation element, there's a financial element, and then there is an emotional level, right? So those 3 things, and those have to be proven by you. The onus is on you, the applicant, and the sponsor to prove that exists. They're not going to ask you, hey guys, we forgot to ask you for these documents, please supply. If you look at the document checklist, it's very specific, right? It'll go through everything, say choose 2 of the following, 4 things. If you choose, one of those things, then the application is just returned. Like, they're just like, it doesn't even matter. You're just going to return it. And so you have to reapply. So the document checklist is like almost like an algorithm. You have to meet the requirements of that before it gets validated and processed. So if you're not meeting the document checklist minimum criteria, you're asking for a return. Now, a return is not a refusal, right? A return is just like you failed to submit the right information. We're sending everything back to you. So you just sort of gather up again and you go ahead and apply. But back on the topic of, documents to prove the relationship is authentic. So, they'll ask for 2 of the 4 documents, for example, for relationship documents. Now, you can supply the 2 and meet the requirement, but what happens if one of those documents is not accepted? Maybe you think it's going to work for what they're asking for, but when they look at it, they're going to say, oh, you know what, this is not really what we're looking for. Now, you're not going to find that information out until another, 6 months later, and they're going to actually return the application saying, you failed to supply the right documents. So how do you overcome something like that? Well, the best offense to this is like a good, strong defense. So what you want to do is you want to supply more than enough of those documents. In fact, I always look for 3. So if the requirement is 2, I want 3. And one easy one is always a letter of support. A letter of support, it comes from like a family member, parent, sister, brother, who can validate the relationship, right? And so they're basically there to offer, 100% support on the relationship side to say, we will, answer any questions that you have about the relationship. We'll just, tell a story about how these 2 people met. And they sign it, they put a, address and date and things. An officer reads that and they're like, how could this be faked? For one, like, it's like a story for one. And even if the details are not 100% like in line, it adds to the narrative that there is an authentic relationship going on here and that there's nothing really that we're trying to hide, So that's really, really important, in terms of, gathering an application together. You really want to make sure that you have enough documentation to prove the authenticity of the relationship. And then, talking about like why an application might be refused on like a bigger level, it always usually comes down to that element that basically, like, we don't believe that you're together for the right reason. We don't believe that you met organically. We don't believe there's a proper narrative or story behind this relationship, and therefore, we're basically refusing this application. Now, if they get to that stage, often before they refuse it, they'll issue a procedural fairness letter. They'll say, hey, listen, provide us with documents or something like in return to prove that we're wrong, right? So you do have an opportunity to kind of like plead your case there, but it might be too little too late, because if you're living apart in other countries and you haven't, kept, in touch, or there isn't a documentation to show that you have that relationship existing, you may not have, enough ammo to go by. So anyway, I'm going to make some more updates on this video or make some more comments in the space below. So please do remember to subscribe to the channel, and I'll do my best to produce some more content on these types of applications, spousals, which we do a lot of. Also, some other topics that are coming down the way, express entry, permanent residency pathways in 2025, the PMP systems, securing work permit extensions in Canada. All these things we're going to try to tackle on the YouTube channel. So welcome everybody, and look forward to engaging, and don't forget to subscribe and leave those comments.